I'm Manny.
I'm Noah.
This is Devin.
And this is No Such Thing, the show where we settle our dumb arguments and yours by actually doing the research. On today's episode, we're talking about the resurgence of assassinations. We'll talk about the Luigi Mangione case, and we'll interview a professor from the University of Chicago who's been studying political violence for decades.
There's no such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing. No such thing.
All right, quick note that this is what the three of us are deeming to be an emergency episode based on what's happening in the news. And for that reason, it's not going to be structured like a normal episode of No Such Thing. We're talking about the rise of political violence, right? We have big newsworthy examples like January 6th, obviously, the attack on Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi's husband, the two different Trump assassination attempts, and all of that kind of leads us to this case where this guy, Luigi Mangione, allegedly assassinated the CEO of United Healthcare. People suspect that this had to do with like frustrations with the healthcare industry, but what the three of us are trying to figure out is why all of this political violence seems to be on the rise. And so, yeah, I think it's a fair question. Like, is political violence on the rise? And, you know, why does it feel like this is happening?
It's interesting because we've gotten in many ways used to mass shooting events, these sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And this is obviously close to that, but very different. Yes. And I think that's why you do see more sympathy for the cause, perhaps, where it's not just random killings of normal citizens. It is targeted in this specific way, which does make more of a statement. I'm curious to hear why we are seeing a rise in that.
Yeah, it was interesting, like, this kind of violence, like, when it has a motivation, and when the motivation of the violence is like something that a lot of people can agree with, like obviously not the killing itself, but when the cause, so to speak, has this sentiment that's against the way that like healthcare runs in this country, you know, we did see like a very layered, very interesting reaction to this.
Just anecdotally, what I've noticed is that people feel more disconnected from the system in a way. You saw this with like low turnout during the election amongst young people. And I think people are over going through the means of the system to see results. And now I think, you know, we don't exactly know, like you're saying, there's this supposed manifesto. We don't exactly know what the motive was here. But I have seen people respond in a way that suggests that they're open to people finding creative ways around the system to seek change.
You know, not to perpetuate my reputation as a Bernie bro, but like I think he and Elizabeth Warren had kind of the quote unquote correct take on this thing, which is to immediately like condemn the shooting, but then try and figure out why this is happening. We don't know shit about this. So after the break, we are going to talk to Robert Pape, who's a professor at the University of Chicago, and he's been studying political violence for decades. So let's just talk to him. Hello, Professor Pape. Thank you for doing this. Can you just start by telling us who you are?
My name is Robert Pape. I'm a professor of political science and director of the University of Chicago Project on Security and Threats. I study political violence. I've been studying political violence for 30 years. For the last 4 years, I have studied American political violence rather extensively. Obviously, I've got a lot of things to say. You know, I've done a bunch of things on this in the last week. And I'm going to be studying political violence here in America, it looks like, easily the next 5 years.
Let's just start there, I think. Like, you've mentioned that there is this trend, and it's an upward trend, and you don't think it's going anywhere. Can you just walk us through what exactly that trend is, how you measure it, and where you think it's going to take us?
The The way you measure political violence in the United States or in Iraq or Afghanistan, anywhere around the world, is really pretty much the same. What political violence is are acts of violence that are meant to send a political message or have an impact on society as a whole, or to change the behavior of an actor, whether it's a government, a corporation, in any particular direction. So whether you want to defund the police, whether you want to get the university administration to stop supporting Israel, whether you're trying to stop an election, that is the transfer of power. These are just some of the examples that all fit under the hood of political violence. Now, starting about 5 or 6 years ago, we started to see a unbelievably noticeable trend upwards in lone wolf political violent attacks. Obviously, the CEO murder fits a lone wolf actor. So in 2018, we saw the Tree of Life shooting.
A tragic day in the city of Pittsburgh, a mass shooting apparently driven by hate at a synagogue in Squirrel Hill. At this hour, 11 people are confirmed dead, 6 more injured, including 4 Pittsburgh police officers.
What you had was a lone wolf attacker, and then he left a manifesto. And his manifesto was all about what's called the Great Replacement, which is this idea that whites are being deliberately replaced. Then in August 2019, we saw another mass shooting, this time at a Walmart in El Paso, killing over 20 Hispanics. And this too, he left a manifesto about the Great Replacement. The identical political theory, this time blaming the issue of the Hispanics in this complex political conspiracy theory. And then we saw in May 2022, the Buffalo shooting, where, again, you have an attacker. He's killing approximately 10 innocent African-Americans just standing in line at a top supermarket here. They've done nothing to him. He doesn't know them from Adam. And he, too, leaves a manifesto, this one 160 pages long. So these are clearly acts of also about the Great Replacement. What those 3 attacks have in common is those shooters were trying to advance the agenda, a political agenda, against what's called the Great Replacement. This is a right-wing conspiracy theory that's been around for years.
What Joe Biden is doing now will change this country forever. So again, why is he doing it? There's only one plausible answer. You're not allowed to say it out loud. In political terms, this policy is called the Great Replacement, the replacement of legacy Americans with more obedient people from faraway countries.
But in these cases, these shooters are leaving manifestos articulating this political agenda. And that's why when I saw the writing on the shell casings of the CEO killing.
CBS News has confirmed from law enforcement officials that the words deny, defend, and depose were written on shell casings at the scene. Investigators are now looking into if those words point to a motive related to insurance companies' responses to claims.
Right away, the clear signs of a politically motivated attack, even if there was somehow an additional personal motive involved. And the more we found out, there appears to be no beef that this guy had with the actual healthcare insurance company itself. We're finding virtually no connection at all. It appears to be almost 100% politically motivated. And that is really a common thing. You often get these mixed motives. You see what I mean? So people are sometimes saying, well, is it only 100% politically driven? Often what you find are volatile individuals. They have their own reasons for being on the edge of violence, for their own psychosocial reasons. Many of them are mentally ill. But then you have this political motive layered on top, and their belief that their act will become popular, that often nudges them over the edge.
So we've been thinking about this obviously a lot over the last couple of days, but I don't think those 3 examples came up for us at all during our conversations. I guess in our minds, we hadn't been thinking about mass shootings as fitting into this larger conversation about political violence.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the fact that people who are anxious about this Great Replacement theory end up being the primary source of political violence.
Professor, we've been asking why there's been this general increase in political violence. Is the answer to that question as simple as the demographic shifts that have been happening around the world, or is there more to it?
I would say the big taproot is the demographic shift. We are going through a historic transition in our country from a white majority democracy to a white minority, truly balanced multiracial democracy. This helps to explain a lot of the virulent reaction to Donald Trump.
You know, when they I think the real number is 15, 16 million people into our country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done.
Because you have folks who are really let's call them on the right, who are very nervous about this transition that's about to happen, and they would like it to be more managed or more carefully done and slowed down. That's where this general nervousness is from. Where are they going to come out in this transition? And then the others, polarization, social media, Trump's character and his personal style of politics, I would say those are three additional factors, but they're like secondary.
So you've been walking us through the general rise in political violence over the years and how it's tied to the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, and that there is demographic change happening all over the world, but the conspiracy part is that it's being done deliberately to wipe out white populations. And then you get these lone wolf characters who are radicalized by this, and they end up being the source of political violence in the past few years. But we've been really interested in assassinations specifically, political violence that is targeted towards a specific person, like this healthcare CEO. Have you been tracking assassinations? Are those on the rise as well?
So in 2022, we saw not just that plot against Justice Kavanaugh.
A man who police say planned to kill Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh is charged with attempted murder this morning.
And then also in October 2022, we saw the assassination attempt against Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, which missed her but almost killed her husband.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office says that someone broke into her home in San Francisco this morning and violently attacked her husband.
Then in the next summer of June 2023, there was an assailant trying to live stream an attack against Barack Obama's home.
A man who police say was armed with explosives is arrested outside the Washington, D.C. home of former President Barack Obama.
And then, of course, we've seen the two assassination attempts against Donald Trump. And there is a whole spate of attacks against congressional leaders. That collection right there, just that number that I identified, you have to go back to 1968. You have to go back to that year which saw the assassination of Martin Luther King.
Some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
Then, just a few months later, you had the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, who was then the leading contender for the Democratic presidential nomination when he was assassinated. If you just focus just on that issue of assassinations, you can see right away that we're at a historical high. We are on a slippery slope of normalization of violence in our country. I call this the era of violent populism. What we find in our surveys is that between 5-10% of Americans, sometimes even 15%, will support political violence for grievances, political grievances they also endorse. And that's 30 million people. That's a lot of people. So I'm not at all surprised by what happened with the CEO here. What happened is, as you guys all probably know, if you go to his X account, before he was arrested at that McDonald's, he literally had only 67 followers on his X account. Within 12 hours, it was 400,000. 400,000. Now there are folk songs for this guy.
For now, Mangione's locked in a cell nearly identical to this one. His supporters are donating tens of thousands of dollars to online legal defense funds.
So why is that? Based on your research, why is there such strong support for this specific assassination?
Well, I think it's been strong because at the taproot of this political violence is anger.
1/3 of this healthcare company's claims are denied, approximately 1/3. That is outrageous. It's more than double the industry standard.
Political anger. And that anger is real, and you can't talk people out of their anger. So our strategy has been not to try to talk people out of their anger. What we think you can do is help them redirect their anger away from violence and toward politics. I don't think talking people out of their anger is the right strategy. What the strategy should be is to have them redirect that anger, which a lot of times is based on reality. I'm not denying that, okay? I'm telling you that's real. So you don't try to talk people out of this anger, because if you do, you're just going to make them more defiant. That's just the way it is. If I try to talk you out of something you're mad about, you're going to dig in, okay? So no, that's not the idea. The idea is, how can I encourage you to make it more productive so that you'll actually have a way to change the system in a productive way? Because you see, if the anger just leads to this political violence, the system may end up getting burned down. But a lot of times what comes in, and we see this in revolutions, is something dramatically, draconianly right-wing. I mean, much worse than Donald Trump. You think Donald Trump's bad? Nothing like the Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979. That started out as a liberal revolution against the Shah of Iran, and then it became seized and taken over by unbelievable hardliners. That's the real trajectory of these when you get real violence like this.
Professor, you have warned us of a future that is bleak, to say the least. But is there a way to avoid it? Like, what can we do as a society that would result in a decrease in political violence?
It's important in this case to recognize, even more than in the others here, that anger needs to have some place to go. And that's what I'm trying to say in different ways in my writings, in the media, on the podcast. And I really think we will ultimately have a soft or a medium soft landing here in 2035. But I think we need to realize this isn't just going to happen on its own. And I'm not really pessimistic, really. I'm realistic about the challenges we face. And I actually think we will come out of this, because I really do believe what I'm encouraging the politicians to do, it's really directly in their interests here. I've been studying this for a long time, and I'm articulating a strategy many of them have never heard of before. They've all been told, well, you just want to talk the violent person out of it. I'm not telling you that's the way to go. I'm telling you that is pretty much a dead end. You've got to focus on the part of the public that's already abhors political violence and move them and their anger, which many of them have, in this more productive direction. Now we can actually solve some of these problems, as opposed to we're going to get violent about it, and that's not going to solve anything, folks.
This has been completely fascinating and illuminating. Thank you so much for joining us.
I love this conversation. I just really appreciate how much you folks really are looking to have a different kind of conversation about this. It really speaks, this is one of the reasons we're going to have that soft landing.
So that was illuminating. I do understand a little bit better, not just the rise in political violence, but also just generally why it's been happening.
And a response.
in response to it as well. Quick note to the listener, thank you for listening to this episode. I know it's not the normal kind of episode of No Such Thing. Let us know how you feel about it, if we should be doing things like this.
More reactions to the news in our future, question mark?
But yeah, thanks for listening. No Such Thing is produced by Manny, Noah, and Devin. The theme song was by me, Manny. Thank you to our guest, Robert Pape, professor at the University of Chicago. For more, be sure to subscribe to nosuchthing.show and feel free to reach out to us at mannynoahdevin@gmail.com. We're off next week for Christmas, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. See you then.